In Hindu theology, everything emerges from, and then returns back to, a singular source. And that divine principle embodies all that is perceivable and knowable in this mysterious world. In post-Vedic time periods, the universal soul of creation was envisaged to have not one, but three forms, described as trimurti, which we mention repeatedly in our discussions on Brahma and Shiva. Brahma, the creator, is one of those forms. Vishnu, the sustainer, is another. And finally, Shiva, the destroyer. Three stages in life, trimurti, because those are the unavoidable terms of engagement that everybody's given when born to the world. And that's the best anybody can ever hope for, because Brahman, the source of truth, is timeless. Birth invariably begets death. But death is good. Death is auspicious, aka Shiva, because it releases us from the bondages of desire and suffering. And it also makes room for new life and the perpetual renovation of creation on earth. And it doesn't affect the source of creation on earth. Every lotus stalk that is born from and sustained by the navel of Vishnu, like us, is destined to succumb to the destructive powers of the third member of the Trimurti, Shiva. Brahma, the creator, and Vishnu, the sustainer, reside within a life-giving aquatic medium. And it so happens that Shiva also abides in scorching spiritual fires that arise from these same waters. But these would be spiritual flames called tejas or tapas in Vedic and classical texts. So in this respect alone, Shiva turns out to be a veritable manifestation of the Vedic god of fire, Agni. These purifying flames envelop the Lord of Destruction and frequently issue from a so-called third eye that is situated between the god's brows. And it annihilates all illusions of life's ever-flowing current known as samsara. Because each member of the Hindu trinity is a reflection or facet of the other two in the world of phenomenology, Shiva's burning eye of omniscience shares the same divine qualities of Vishnu's mystical eye of wisdom. For his eye also illuminates the world with the light of a sun, a moon, and spiritual flames. And again, these traits were originally attributed to the mystical eyes of Soma and Agni of the Vedas. To quote a classical perspective from the Mahabharata, "Salutations to Shiva, you who have many lotuses on your body. Salutations to you that are of the complexion of the sun. To you who are like unto the sun. To you whose face is like the sun. To you that has eyes, each of which is like the sun. Salutations to you who art Soma. To you that art as mild as Soma. To you that bears the lunar disk. To you that has a lunar aspect." So we see here that the lotuses on the body of Shiva are actually the attributes that are shining like the sun and moon and flaming with fire. The cleansing and liberating eye of Shiva is a destructive force, in this case, but a destructive force that has positive outcomes. This is because death is a release from the roots of all evil. Evils that spring from our karma, which arises from our desires, our suffering, and delusions. And these do not pertain to the transcendental dimension of the Hindu Trimurti. Like Vishnu, the roles of Shiva are performed in many and sundry human and animalian forms that appear on earth as both masculine and feminine beings. While Vishnu's lotus-eyed condition relates to the sustenance of living creation, Shiva's eye and its power to make sure the earth will never be overburdened with too many living beings. In Hindu mythology, Shiva sometimes assumes this role begrudgingly and usually at the behest of his alter ego, Brahma. But in his moments of peace, Shiva abides on earth as a lone ascetic that prefers his solitude and the practice of penance in isolated mountain caves and grottos. Or sometimes he is to be found meditating in killing fields, war zones, and cemeteries. He is, after all, a god of death. Shiva's devotees, in like fashion, often adopt a lifelong practice of self-mortification. Since destruction in Hindu doctrine is perceived as a form of liberation from the trappings of samsara, rather than an end to life. Because even when an individual dies, it's not an end to life. Not for the Atman, not for Brahman, not to the Hindu Trimurti. Because life does not miss a beat after we die. In keeping with the tenets of the Upanishads, destruction by the hand of Shiva should be considered a blessing, even though deluded and evil creatures perceive their annihilation as a bane. And since Shiva, as a god of death, instigates our passage out of the wheel of life, he tends to evoke both fear and reverence among gods and mortals alike, much as his immediate antecedent in the Vedic hymns known as Rudra. This Vedic god's title was always associated with Shiva during post-Vedic eras. Shiva's popularity arrived relatively late in Indian history. The god's prominent position in myth and the arts of India does not come to full fruition until the medieval period of India, well into the medieval period, and that begins around the 7th century, at which time Shiva begins to eclipse Vishnu as a protagonist in mythology. Much as Brahman surpassed Vedic Agni and Indra in the Upanishads, and as Vishnu edged out Brahma in the epics. And yet, Shiva is conventionally defined as the same divine being as Vishnu and Brahma in the epics and Puranas, even if his mythic roles in these tales are secondary to those of Krishna and Rama. We have hard evidence that Shiva began to rise in the ranks of the Brahmanic pantheon around 2,000 years ago on the basis of the appearance of the god's most important and paradoxical symbol, a divine phallus known as the lingam in archaeological records. In the beginning of the 6th century, stone lingas appear with increasing frequency across the Indian subcontinent. And by the 9th century, they are standard fixtures among temples throughout Burma, Indochina, and the Malaysian archipelago. The migration of Shaivism, the school of Brahmanism that focuses its devotions on Shiva, actually anticipates the appearance of the Khmer dynasty in Indochina and the Majapahit dynasty of Indonesia from the 9th to 14th centuries. In fact, the pioneering Hindu communities of pre-Angkorian Cambodia, beginning around 18 or so hundred years ago, focused most of their worship on a god known as Hari Hara, a dual god that shared the qualities of both Vishnu, golden Hari, and Shiva, Hara, the destroyer. More than any other member of the Hindu pantheon, Shiva is the god of paradox. In Hindu mythology, he is surrounded by an aura of destructive fires. Yet he is often defined as being the darkest of gods and a denizen of lotus groves. He is a cosmic dancer that maintains the beat of time by his lotus-stepping gambols, and yet he is also an unmoved yogi. Shiva is a celibate with a perpetual heart-on. He's both an inciter and destroyer of lust. He commonly enjoys long sessions of uninterrupted love play with his consort and female identity, the creative and destructive embodiment of sexual fires, known as Shakti, or known as the comely mountain lady, Parvati, his consort. His bouts at love play can last up to 10,000 years, the tales say, because he intentionally retains his seed when he couples with Parvati, so as to avoid procreation. Yet, as a rather rapacious divinity, he demands chastity of his devotees. Shiva's potent semen is responsible for the life breath of every creature that has been ensnared by the delusional fluxions of samsara. So, Shiva, like the rest, is something of a mystery. The god of destruction's ambivalent sexual roles arise from his self-identification with the male and female conditions of Brahman. Bliss is achieved by the unification of these gendered principles in creation, and also by the annihilation of creation, which erases all notions of sexual definition and activities. These general concepts apply equally, of course, to Vishnu and his ancient Vedic predecessor, Prajapati. But the latter gods differ somewhat from Shiva by the manner in which they are inherently predisposed to spill their seed being Soma, and generously so, into the golden womb of creation. Not so Shiva, because he assumes the responsibility of annihilating the products of living creation instead of creating life. He does so with an aim to destroy delusions that arise from his self-created Maya, power of illusions. The universal destroyer has over 1,000 names, but he normally is addressed as either Shiva or Rudra, sometimes as Shiva-Rudra in combination. The name Shiva refers generally to his benevolent or gracious nature and emphasizes the empathetic feelings for humanity. Let's call it tough love. We encounter the first usage of the word Shiva in the Vedas, but as an adjective, as a descriptive term, in fact, that signifies the benevolent nature of the Vedic god known as Rudra, one of his alternative titles in classical mythology. On the other hand, Vedic Rudra is described generally in terms of a bellicose and potentially dangerous deity that is responsible for death and destruction, much as Shiva in the epics and Puranas. Vedic Rudra is destructive, fierce and strong, and like other devas, invincible. Early Indo-Aryans expressed hopes in their hymns that Rudra might spare them his horrible wrath, or otherwise beseech him to guard them against the wrath of other gods. And often in the same breath they request that he grant the Aryan singers wealth, health, and welfare. Like Soma Pavamana, Vedic Rudra is an archer with 1,000 eyes. Hence his presence is frequently described in the plural as Rudras, implying that his offspring represent an army of his clones. The same observation holds for the concept of Somas, in the plural, in the Vedas. The Rudras are also identified in the Rig Veda as the Maruts, a class of Soma-bearing, bolt-wielding cloud gods that spring from the body of a bovine earth goddess by the name of Prishni. Thus, it only follows that the Rudras, the ruddy ones, may be an alternative name for the Somas. And indeed, Rudra is identified as Agni himself in various Vedic verses, as well as Soma. One hymn of the Rig Veda is dedicated to Soma Rudra and sings praise to a god that specifically provides priests with the treasure of Soma. In the 100-path Brahmana, Rudra is identified as both a soma cow and the lord of the soma plant. Thus, from a classical Puranic perspective, Shiva unites his soul with the Hindu trinity by drinking a supreme nectar that he calls, quote-unquote, imperishable Brahman. Or he occasionally manifests himself materially in the body of Soma for the liberation of his devotees. To quote the Linga Purana, the form called Soma, appertaining to the divine ruler and lord of the Devas, Shiva, nourishes the sky gods and ancestral fathers with his immortalizing nectar. And the Mahabharata equates Shiva with a state of mind and spiritual being that is inscrutable, a notion that obviously borrows directly from older doctrinal precepts of the Upanishads. To quote, Mahadeva, the great god Shiva, is eternal Brahman. Verily, the beginning, middle, and end of Mahadeva cannot be apprehended by the very deities. Like Brahma, the imperishable and non-dualistic aspect of Shiva instigates the flow of material forms in samsara on a cyclic, seasonal, annual basis. Perceptions of duality are produced by the maya of Shiva when he shrinks himself in size, thereby reducing himself to a purusha and a prakriti, that would be cosmic man and woman, cosmic mind and matter, respectively. This male and female being couple, conjugate to produce the three gunas, raja, sattva, and tamas, that would be representing creation, sustenance, and dissolution, in order to establish samsara. And from these three forms arise the intellect, delusions of the ego, the five senses, sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, and all the fundamental trappings of creation. So, in this chain of reaction of creative events, Shiva, like Brahman in the Upanishads, is identified as the source of the Trinity. The Padma Purana asserts, O king, the form of Shiva and that of Vishnu are identical. Vishnu is the heart of Shiva, and Shiva is the heart of Vishnu. The three gods, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, are one form. All these concepts are now quite familiar to us at this point. So having attained his popularity rather late in Indian history, we also find that Shiva took on a number of titles and attributes of the latest Buddha in India, Siddhartha Gautama. Names such as Mahabodhi were assumed by Shiva, meaning the Great Awakened One, or Buddha itself. He also goes by the name of Gautama, of the family name of the last Buddha, the name of Dharma, universal law, and actually he goes by the name of Nirvana. Other titles identify Shiva as the lotus, the sacred lotus, as the god Soma, and as the elixir of immortality, as suggested by the title of Pushkara, meaning lotus, Kamalekshana, O lotus-eyed, Pushpa Lokana, lotus-eyed, Padmagarbha, lotus-wombed, Padmasana, lotus-seated, Hart Pundari Kasini, occupant of the lotus heart, Padmanabha, lotus-navel, and the names of Amrita, Madhu, Amritamaya, Somapa, drinker of Soma, and Kailasha, Soma vessel. I think you get the point here. By and large, symbolic attributes of Shiva in the arts of India and Southeast Asia highlight the god's mythical roles as a destroyer. Shiva usually employs a specific part of his body to obliterate delusions of the material world, and this would be his phallus, his third eye, his ever-consumptive mouth, or more generically, a conflagration of his spiritual fires. As such, these same body parts are employed as symbols of Shiva's transcendental qualities. In the guise of a naked ascetic, a dancer, an ash-smeared corpse, a serpent, bull, or lion, Shiva also adopts a powerful weapon that was formerly employed by his Vedic ancestors. This being a stalked, triple-tipped vajra, known as the Trishula, the triple-tipped. The trident is, in fact, Shiva's signatory symbol. Most iconographic interpretations of Shiva employ a combination of these symbolic forms, and usually in association with Shiva's flower, the sacred lotus. The Trident of Shiva Rudra is a multi-purpose symbol that is often identified visually with the god's pillar, his stanu or skambha, his phallus, the linga, his arrows, the saru, and lotus flowers, all these being attributes of Soma Pavamana in the Vedas. We recall that the triple-pronged vajra, the thunderbolt of the storm god Indra, in prehistoric Vedic hymns, was identified with the plant of the gods. So it seems pretty clear that this symbol was retrofitted for the classical Hindu god of destruction during post-Vedic eras. And Shiva employed the weapon in exactly the same way as his Vedic predecessors, by overcoming dragons and asuras with the trident. In the Puranas, Shiva also inherits two standard features of Vedic Soma, these being the pillar, the stanu, as well as his mythic role and title as Sharva, a divine archer. And looking back in time, one can find a Vedic verse or two that explicitly identifies the arrow shaft of Soma Pavamana as none other than the shaft of Rudra in Vedic verses. This same association can be understood in the Puranic identification of Shiva as an animated pillar, or stanu, a term that derives from the Sanskrit word root sta, meaning to stand upright, in the original context of Soma's erect stems. When we consider that Soma's upright shafts were identified as the pillar or support of cosmic order, Rita, in Vedic hymns, and also as the form of the Rudras, and also in the form of a golden womb, Hiranyagarbha, which pours forth streams of ambrosia, we are justified in identifying Shiva as a new and derivative incarnation of Soma Pavamana. Mythologists and devotees of the god of destruction are mystified by the contradictive dual purposes of Shiva's divine phallus, his lingam. This fertile member is usually described as an invincible, unmovable, and therefore unavoidable destroyer of the cosmos. A destructive penis. How's that for paradox? Shiva's erect phallus is often described as the embodiment of the Hindu trinity, since it is recognized as the source of the universe, the unmoved sustainer of the universe, and an all-consuming destructive pillar of pyrogenic fury. It is also the source of Shiva's cosmic seed, his retas, a term that originally referred to Soma, the Vedic nectar of the gods. The three gunas, life forms of Shiva's stanu, the pillar, may therefore be identified with the three life stages of a lotus column. The phallus of Shiva is given vegetative attributes when it is referred to as the mula stambha, or the root pillar of creation. This descriptive term establishes an indirect connection between Shiva, a masculine god of destruction, and Padma, Vishnu's consort and feminine manifestation as a goddess of procreation. For Padma, Lotus Lady is called the Mula Prakriti, as opposed to the Mula Stambha. But these terms mean the same thing. Mula Prakriti refers to the root of nature, the source of samsara, and therefore, essentially the root of Vishnu's, floral umbilicus, as we shall soon see. So it should come as little surprise that Shiva's phallus is frequently depicted as an upright lotus stalk, whose flower is consumed by an aura of creative and destructive flames. Shiva and his powerful stanu also go by the name of the triple-eyed one, Trinetra, Triambaka, Triaksha, so called when his phallic pillar supports a blazing triple light in the heavens. These titles and characteristics very clearly derive from the triple-eyed condition of Rudra in the Rig Veda, or, in fact, to the triple lights and triple births of both Vedic Soma and Agni. The underlying meaning of this allusion has long escaped explanation, but the Mahabharata attributes this unusual characteristic to Shiva's mystical eye, which is said to be comprised of a sun and moon within a ring of fire. This mythic image is identical to that of Vishnu's lotus eyes in the Bhagavad Gita, which can be understood to be the Vedic Soma's golden eyes in our discussions on the Vedas in other episodes. The symbolic imagery is best understood by examining the morphological features of a full-blown lotus blossom, which exhibits a centralized, full moon-shaped seed receptacle in the middle, a compact whirl of hundreds of golden stamens, which are often identified as the rays of a solar lotus flower, and a whirl of white and or pink petals, the so-called licking and ruddy flames of the Vedic god of fire, Agni. The symbolic relationship between the sacred flower and Shiva's triple eye is confirmed by other passages of the 10th chapter of the Mahabharata, which describes this burning orb as a smokeless fire that exhibits the luster of both Soma and a white lotus blossom. The mythic image of Shiva as a cosmic bull, or Vresa, complements Soma and Indra's bovid forms in the Vedas. And as such, Shiva's favorite mode of transport is a bull vehicle known as either Nandi, joyfulness, or Dharma, truth. This gentle creature serves the Lord of Destruction as a beast of burden by transporting the god across the heavens on a lotus throne. When Shiva mounts Nandi, he is recognized as a master and keeper of a cow herd, which is to say, Gopati, not unlike Indra in the Rig Veda and or Krishna in classical mythology. Javanese impressions of Nandi exhibit the typical features of an Indian Brahmin bull, as you can see. The prominent hump above his shoulders match closely with ubiquitous hump-shouldered bovids that figure so prominently on the ancient Indus River seals, which we touch upon in our episodes on Soma and the Vedas. But here, Nandi resides peacefully on a lotus blossom and bears a lotus blossom on his back. As such, when Shiva mounts his joyful bull, he also enthrones himself upon a lotus flower. Like Brahma and Vishnu, Shiva is capable of dividing his unborn, androgynous self into a male and female principle. A Purusha, the masculine personification of mind, and the Purusha's Shakti, a term that signifies Shiva's female personification of his fiery, creative, and or destructive energies, as well as creative matter, Prakriti. Shiva's androgynous form, with one full breast and an ample hip on his right side, and a flat chest with narrow hips on his left. Per the usual, his genders are symbolized in the fashioning of enormous floral mortars and phallic pestles, as you can see here, that likely served as well in the extraction of Soma in days gone by. The mortar is referred to as a yoni, which is usually depicted as a floral vulva, and the pestle is called a lingam or phallus. when pounded together, they generate the elixir of immortality, i.e., the retas, or semen of Shiva. Shiva and his consort are therefore bisexual aspects of the universal soul, each gender sharing the role of creating the universe and myriad sexual forms of the universal self. This general concept obviously derives from the Vedantic concept of Brahman, and it also mirrors the role of Vishnu and his consort, Sri Lakshmi, as well as Brahma and his floral mate, Sarasvati. Sexual urges are believed to spring from the forces of Shiva's Shakti, his feminine fire, which resides within his unborn self as a female genitrix. This eternal and powerful principle expresses itself in the reproductive urges of all living creatures. So let's follow a tale on this relationship in the Shiva Purana. When Brahma first created the cosmos from the unmanifest, he found there were no creatures that shared his ability to procreate. A voice from the heavens informed the Creator that the propagation of living beings required the coupling of creatures. However, since the lotus-born God of creation had never created a female organism, during an age in which the act of copulation was unknown to the world, Brahma meditated on Shiva in the image of the unmanifest one, with his Shakti, his material urgings. From Brahma's imagination arose Shiva in the form of both sexes, the two of which separated from each other to do the bidding of the lotus-born God. Brahma bowed reverently to the goddess and informed her of his own incapacity to create female beings, requesting, therefore, of the goddess to provide him with the ability to produce women. Shiva's Shakti responded by creating a great luster from her third eye, and willed that this sexual energy enter daksha, this being the Vedic personification of ritual skill. She then returned to the body of Shiva and disappeared. And at this moment, Brahma attained bliss through the creation of women, and living creatures inherited the ability to copulate. The Linga Purana is more explicit in establishing a connection between the phallus, or linga of Shiva, and the nectar of immortality. This text identifies the cosmic phallus as the source of the Hindu trinity, and the all-expressing syllable that sums up the ultimate meaning of the Vedas, that being the sacred syllable, Aum. The semen of the phallus is the nectar of the gods. To quote, Shiva is expressed by means of the single syllable, the sound of the divine order, the ultimate cause, truth, bliss, nectar, all being supreme Brahman, more immense than the greatest. Out of that single syllable, Aum, the syllable A, is Brahma, U is Vishnu, and is Rudra, Shiva. Is the cause of creation, the illusion, and of bliss. The syllable is the sower, is the seed, and mu is the womb. Aum. Thus the sower, the seed, and the womb, together with Nara, constitute Lord Shiva. The sower divided itself out by his own free will. Out of the linga of the Lord, the sower created semen as which was discharged into the womb, where it is increased all around.